In an effort to streamline teaching the Gilded Age, because we really only have the rest of this week and going into next week to get this particular unit finished, I wanted to go ahead and record some of these. Now, you will be responsible for listening to them and watching them and that sort of thing. So I want you to, I will put these on Edpuzzle so that I can make sure that everybody is watching them, and I'll probably incorporate some kind of check to make sure you're doing so. So to start with, remember that immigration is the key development. 14 million people come. Remember, I said the other day that this is basically like triple the population. Okay, most people will stay, few will go home, and you've got a number of different push and pull factors. I think I mentioned in class that escaping religious persecution, escaping political persecution, lack of economic opportunity, and just lack of opportunity in general in Europe and in Asia is going to push people to the United States. This is combined with the pull factors, which is lots of available land, the Homestead Act, an economic boom, lots of jobs. Even though the jobs may not be maybe under very difficult conditions, that doesn't mean that there's not plenty of jobs to be had. So people will travel. Not a very easy trip. It's a very challenging trip in many ways. And so these people will come over. If you're talking about coming in on the East Coast, they're going to be arriving through Ellis Island. This is in New York. This is your main point of entry. You did have a few people entering through some other ports like Boston or, say, Charleston. But Ellis Island in New York is the main one. Often, once they arrive there, they then move farther into the inner part of the country. And they have to undergo numerous medical exams. They get checked for lice. They get checked for disease. Sometimes they get quarantined. And sometimes if they don't meet the standards, the health standards, they'll get deported back. So just kind of know that while we do have pretty open immigration during this time period, that does not mean that that it's all kind of a piece of cake as far as just anybody coming in. On the West Coast, you're going to have people coming in through what we call Angel Island. That's in San Francisco. And these are for mostly Asian immigrants, Chinese and Japanese. So they go through the same kind of process, right? So why would we worry about the screening process? What makes, think about what kind of people you would want coming in to do work. If the whole purpose of immigration is to have workers, you need people who are healthy and capable of working. And by 1890, 1 in 7 people are foreign born. These are some images from Ellis Island that shows the island, that shows immigrants arriving, as well as immigrants waiting to be processed down here in this corner. And then over here, you're going to see that you have people that are getting on wagons to go into the city. These are, again, numerous people waiting to be examined or waiting to be deported or put on, wagons to go back into the city. So very crowded conditions, very much like working through a herd of cattle. Angel Island in San Francisco is going to look very much the same. So here is San Francisco Bay. There's Alcatraz, if you've ever been in San Francisco. This is the Golden Gate. Here's Angel Island. You can see here's a group of Japanese immigrants, and this is kind of the facilities that they relied on back then. And again, they go through the same process. Factors about immigration in the Gilded Age. For the Europeans, you can see what a lot of this is. A lot of this kind of makes typical sense. And for the Asian, which are going to be primarily Chinese, understand that China had been undergoing a great deal of exploitation by European countries for a couple hundred years. And so you also had a great deal of corruption in the Chinese imperial government. And so there was not enough jobs. There was not enough opportunity for young men. The Asian immigration in particular focuses on temporary immigration, although you do get enough coming over that there begins to be some pushback against Asian immigrants. Probably because, first off, they looked very different, right? Some of these European immigrants wouldn't really, to the naked eye, wouldn't look different. They'd be white. They may or may not speak English. They might have had an accent, but fundamentally speaking, they blend in. They're probably, either Catholic or Protestant. So it'd be much more familiar to a lot of people in the United States, whereas Asians are going to clearly look different. They're also willing to take jobs that no one else will take. They're also willing to work for very little money, and so this is why people are going to begin to perceive this as being, they're trying to take jobs away from American citizens, and they're really just escaping the lack of opportunity in the political turmoil. Japanese immigration will begin to pick up as well because there's lots of rapid industrialization in Japan, and Japan's kind of struggling. What you'll see, and we'll talk about Teddy Roosevelt later, but when he's president, he'll kind of reach an agreement with Japan by which they'll restrict the amount of immigration. This will matter because this is where the Japanese Americans that will be put in internment camps will come from, is from this immigration in this period. So again, the advantages of Europeans has a lot to do with appearance. All of these groups are going to have challenges of language, challenges of assimilation, and that kind of thing. And so typically they're going to cope by trying to come in and get plugged into ethnic communities within the cities. By the time you get to the 1900s, immigration is going to shift primarily. Again, we're not going to have any more Chinese immigration. That's going to be thanks to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. And then you're going to start to see more immigration coming from Eastern Europe. Yes, you'll still have some from Western Europe, Britain, Germany, France, Ireland, but most of it's going to be coming from Eastern Europe. The Greek states, the areas like Czechoslovakia and Poland and that kind of thing. Russia, and some from Turkey. So they're going to come into these cities and ethnic neighborhoods that will provide kind of a sense of belonging. There'll be, people that speak their native language. This will help ease their support, their transition into the larger culture, help them acclimate to English. They'll also have access to jobs, and to some extent to political involvement, churches, clubs, all that kind of stuff. This is where we get these names like Little Italy from. Marketability, the amount of money they have when they come over, as well as how quickly they can adapt, are all factors that make this a lot better. These ethnic neighborhoods are often overcrowded. They're often in yucky tenements that's unsanitary. There's lots of crime. They struggle with unemployment. These are often the last hired, first fired kind. And this, of course, the nature of business with its massive consolidation and its demand for numerous employees is going to kind of factor into this. Now, you do have a journalist by the name of Jacob Riis, and you do need to know his name. Jacob Riis documents in his book, How the Other Half Lives, these urban living conditions, right? And he's going to show, and there's some pictures down here that Jacob Riis took, of kind of these kind of dark, crime-ridden alleys, children left unsupervised, dangerous kind of fire hazard conditions, as well as overcrowded apartments. These pictures will motivate a lot of individuals, particularly in the middle class, to begin to have concerns for these ethnic neighborhoods and how they're structured, and that maybe these particular people are going to be struggling. Again, these population centers, there will be large populations on the East Coast, but they will filter out. You can see St. Louis, Chicago, Milwaukee begin to be very populated. And all of this immigration is going to ultimately lead to a rise of nativism. This is going to be a preference for native-born people who are born in the United States. And the focus is going to be on limiting immigration, and there's going to be increasing discrimination against people from other countries. So again, nativism is something that we see very often today. And it's a direct reaction to immigration and the economic pressures that are caused really by industrialization and by business consolidation and the impact of large numbers of workers driving wages down, which is indeed an impact, right? And of course, that's kind of what the economic pressures are, boom and bust cycles, and that sort of thing. So in the 1840s and 1850s, and you might remember this from 8th grade, it focused heavily on the Irish potato famine. By the 1870s, it was on the Asians, the Jews, the Eastern Europeans. And then there's going to be this real fear of non-Protestant influence, this idea that Catholics answer to a pope, that the Eastern Orthodox answer to a patriarch, and that Jews answer to rabbis, and that somehow this is fundamentally undemocratic, right? We already touched on labor unions opposing immigration because it undermines wages for American-born workers. And you will have ethnic violence occurring, right? People pushing against that. So reasons for nativist opposition: fear of Catholicism, that it's going to weaken the union. And of course, the union activity is very, very young and small. Take jobs from Americans, and fear to American culture. Now, I do want to point out this particular political cartoon shows you, if you look at it very carefully, this is an immigrant. If you look at the way he's dressed, he's got these earrings. He's very kind of Mediterranean looking. This could be Italian. This could be Greek. This could be Russian. It could be Turkish, and very foreign looking, right? He has the name pauper labor. This pauper means poor. So he's a poor worker that's not bringing any money with him. Back in the background is Ellis Island, and there's a whole stream of immigrants coming in. So what is the meaning to this cartoon? If you read at the bottom, the inevitable result to the American working man of indiscriminate immigration. And of course, here's the immigrant stealing the bread and the butter from the American worker. So that is kind of an anti-immigrant cartoon. This one right here, you have to look at very carefully. Typically, when I show this in class, people always struggle to figure out what these little creatures are. Their initial impression is that they're alligators, but I suggest you look more closely. There is a face right here. There's a hand right here. Looks like there's a cape and a cross. And this is a bishop's hat. So this would be the impact of Catholicism invading our country, and Americans being a threat to kind of a Catholic Inquisition, if you will. This is the Vatican in the background, and this is the United States under attack, essentially. So these cartoons very clearly represent the nativist mindset. Nativist responses, not only will there be attitudes and discrimination and that kind of thing in political cartoons, but you'll actually see a working man's party in the 1870s, particularly strong in California. They're very opposed to Asian immigration, worked actively to promote the Chinese Exclusion Act. You're going to see the American Protective Agents Association in 1887. They are directly opposed to Catholic immigration, want to stop all Catholics from coming in for fear that it will challenge our Protestant background. In 1882, you see a couple of different laws passed to really kind of slow down the pace of immigration. One of them will ban convicts and the mentally ill and people who don't have any money, and it will also place a tax on immigrants. So that's one way they begin to kind of slow down the pace of immigration. And then lastly, the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882 stops Chinese immigration for 10 years and prevents Chinese immigrants from becoming citizens. And this is essentially kind of, Congress exerting its authority over immigration control. And this will very clearly, you can see the numbers here, it will drop dramatically. In fact, one of the reasons why one can argue that we have a difficult relationship with China today is because back in 1882, we basically told China, yeah, we don't want to build any connections with you. And so really, this Chinese Exclusion Act stays in place until we're in the middle of World War II, and China is technically our ally. And so then we decide that we want to be friends. But by then, China has undergone a revolution. They've had a great deal of changes. And really, our relationship with China has never healed from this. We really kind of shut the door on China, didn't want to get to know them, didn't want to understand them. And it has shaped our foreign policy even into the 21st century, thanks in part to these early nativist responses. All right, so this is going to be it for the first part. There'll be part 2 coming up shortly.